Okay, thank you very much for that introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rob, and I'm based at the Open University in the UK. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about research methods and some of the work that we've been doing in the Global OER Graduate Network. And hopefully, you're here because you've got an interest in research. And I think we're definitely finding ways to support things that people are doing in different contexts through the work that we're doing. So I hope you'll find this to be of value. It's good to be with you, even if we can't all be together as usual. And I hope you're all enjoying the conference. So we've got about 25 minutes, and here's the terrain that I'm going to try to cover in that time. First of all, a bit of background on the Global OER Graduate Network and what we do. And then just to give you some background on why we've been working on a research methods handbook and what we're trying to achieve with it. I'm going to go through how we put together the handbook and the sort of production process around it. And I'm going to share with you some thoughts around how to try to make something as complex as research methods more accessible to more people. And then I'm going to talk about kind of the structure of the handbook and the kind of insights that we have in there. And I'm going to talk about what we might do in the future for further editions of the handbook. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to stick them in the chat. I may not see them right away, but I welcome your questions and feedback. So let's start with GoGN, the Global OER Graduate Network. So you can see there's our project URL on there if you want to go and check out the website. What we do at GoGN is support doctoral level research in open education. So we have a network of doctoral and postdoctoral scholars all around the world. Originally, back in 2013, GoGN was founded by Fred Mulder in collaboration with Rory McGreal. And since, I think, around 2017, GoGN has been managed by my team at the Open University. We're based in the Institute of Educational Technology, and we're funded by the Hewlett Foundation. And the aims of the network are threefold. So firstly, we aim to raise the profile of research and people doing research in open education. We also offer various forms of direct and indirect support to people doing PhDs or EdDs in open education. And this is quite broadly construed. So OER-based stuff, open educational practices, MOOCs, and so on. And what's distinctive about the way we do this, I think, is that we're interested in openness itself as a process of research, as a feature of research, and also as a kind of organizing principle and sort of set of guiding values, if you like. So at the moment we have in excess of 100 researchers who are either doing a doctorate or have recently done a doctorate. And around that, we have about 200 additional experts, PhD supervisors, and interested parties. So we have this big kind of community of practice, which really goes, around the world now. So that's what GoGN does. So why are we doing a research methods handbook, and why have we got a focus on research methods? I'm going to start off by saying, okay, well, what's research method? And I think there's a simple answer. You may look at this and that doesn't look that simple. But the simple answer is a research method is how you do research, how you collected data, how you analyzed it. Lots of models for this have a sort of hypothesis-based approach where you're looking for data for or against the hypothesis. And ultimately, the aim of all this is that the method that you use supports your claim to have found something out. So the validity of your research is grounded in research methods. So that's the simple answer, and that's the kind of answer you'll find in a dictionary definition. The reality of it is often a lot more intimidating. And really that just covers, if you like, the tip of this iceberg. where method is like, well, that's what I did. That's how that's how I did this research. But then when you start to try to justify a particular method that you've used by making it systematic, which is where we study methodology and we look for better methods and better methodologies to increase and support the validity of what we're doing. What you find is that the more you look into it and the more you kind of try to justify what you're doing, you end up looking at theoretical foundations, and they themselves lead you to the philosophical foundations. So the differences between different methods are often ultimately philosophical. So not everyone's a philosopher, right? And not everyone is able to engage with some of the language of these philosophical nuances of different methods. So the challenge around research methods is often how can you understand the benefits of different methods or the appropriateness of different methods without going too deeply into the philosophical elements, which we know from the feedback that we get from our doctoral members that it can be, kind of a sort of slough of despond where you can get, really sucked into this thing. I think, well, I can't justify what I'm doing properly. I don't really understand these kind of more abstract ideas around that we're trying to ground our work in. So the feedback that we get from members, and we often have these kind of consultation points where we invite people to tell us how we can help them. And methods is always something that comes up, not just with GoGN students, but other students generally. This is a kind of critical issue that people face in doing doctoral level research. And in a way, it should lead you outside your comfort zone, right? It shouldn't be easy because you're trying to create new knowledge. That's not to say that you have to engage with it at this level to create new knowledge, because you could, do a survey or whatever, and that's perfectly valid. But at doctoral level, you need to go into these elements. Another sort of aspect to this is that people often don't feel like they can be upfront about not understanding some of this stuff. Even with their own supervisor, somehow they feel like they're expected to know it, and they're expected to be on top of lots of different methods and understand them all and compare them all and so on. So part of the idea with this this project is to give people that kind of grounding, and to do it in a kind of accessible way. There's another sort of strand to it though, which is that we're interested in openness as a field of study, and what happens when you take methods that have been generated in educational research more generally, and then apply them to an open context or an OER context and stuff like that. So there's a distinction that you might make between openness as an object of study, which is something that all of our researchers have, and openness as a method. So, are there open methods that people use and so on? And so the wider thing there is that open practices essentially challenge some of our assumptions about how this kind of activity should be done. So, so we're trying to address people's insecurities about research. We're trying to acknowledge the complexity, but not be too reductive about making it accessible. And the approach that we decided to take was to combine, on the one hand, a kind of critical reflection on methods written by ourselves as the kind of core GoGN team. But then we also wanted to draw on the insights of all these doctoral researchers that we're in contact with, and try to capture what they found and what they learned by using different methods. And so the handbook is intended to be an accessible entry point into all this stuff. So you don't have to be a doctoral researcher to use this handbook. But we're trying not to dumb it down if that's possible. So it's quite a delicate balance. But we relied on, if you like, the diversity and the considerable experience of all the researchers in the network to try and distill that down into something that would make sense to people. So how did we go about doing it? So the original impetus for all this was a pre-COVID, pre-lockdown thing. So up till April, it all happened as it was supposed to. So in January, we put an announcement out that we're intending to do this. We had a webinar about it, and we got some feedback from members about the scope of what we were trying to do, what they wanted to see in it, and that kind of thing. So we had a survey that went out where we asked people to share their insights and share their experiences of using particular methods in their own doctoral work. Now, the idea then was, just ahead of OER 20 in April in London, we were going to have a workshop. We were going to invite people to come and take part in it, and we were going to brainstorm stuff and collect stuff and move it on that way. In the end, that couldn't happen. So the whole thing was moved online and kind of scaled down a little bit. And then over the summer, we drafted the sort of narrative part. We put together all of the responses. And in June, we had an open process of review. So anyone in the network could go in, I think it was a Google Doc, and give us feedback, editorial feedback, and make sure they were happy with their contributions and that kind of thing. So we're currently in, so we had a pretty good reception in July when we published the handbook. We're currently in a kind of dissemination phase, so we're doing presentations like this. Next week, we will receive the Open Education Award for Research Excellence for this handbook from Open Education Global, which is a very nice outcome for the whole thing. So in a way, I think one thing that's happened with this handbook is that it's found an audience orders of magnitude greater than the original intended audience, which would, doctoral researchers. There's probably just a kind of a few hundred or a few thousand of them out there. But we've had many times more downloads than that, and we've seen the handbook shared into research communities that have got nothing to do with open education at all. So, so the impact of this has been pretty good, and it's been good to have a kind of collective authorship and a collective approach to it. So why has it been received so well? I think a big part of it is that we were trying to make this stuff accessible, and it really is accessible. I think, so let me take you back to when we started this current phase of GoGN. Went through a process of trying to establish a kind of identity for ourselves, a new visual identity, a new branding, and that kind of thing. So this is from one of those original brainstorms that we had, and we worked with an artist called Brian Mathers, who's online as Visual Thinkery. And I think his artwork is a big part of what's helped to make this accessible. But we had lots of ideas about what we were trying to do in GoGN in this phase, how to properly articulate notions of social justice, properly articulate ways in which we can support each other, can think big, we can kind of be creative, we can give things back to the community and so on. And where we ended up with all this was the idea or the theme of a kind of golden age of travel. Because one of the things that we offer to our members is the chance to come to a physical seminar for a couple of days, normally before one of the big conferences. And so this was the kind of identity that we went with, these motifs of travel, not just a physical journey, but also an intellectual journey. So obviously, like 2020 had other things in mind when it came to having that kind of travel, and it remained a kind of abstract thing in a lot of ways. But we still liked that idea, that motif of a journey. And so with this handbook, the idea is that there's a journey that takes place. In this case, it's the journey of a penguin. And I need to do a little bit of explanation for the penguin, I think. So the penguin has become the unofficial or semi-official GoGN mascot. And this really happened in a sort of haphazard way, where we were getting some conference swag made up. And one of the options you could have was like a plush penguin. But they went down so well that it's become kind of adopted as part of the GoGN identity. And there's a global south aspect to this, right? So penguins come from the global south, and supporting and promoting research in the global south is one of our expressed intentions. So this provided some of the visual style for the report. And this golden age of travel element was also applied in different ways. So here, going back to this iceberg, you can see the philosophical foundations here. We have slightly scary and sorry to the person doing captions, but ontology, axiology, and epistemology are these kind of core philosophical elements, which often can be a bit intimidating if you don't have a background in that stuff. And in the handbook, they're rendered as kind of passport stamps. So the idea is, you have to learn these things at some level, get your stamp, move on from it, and not get too bogged down in it. So the penguin kind of goes on a journey and gets the stamps and so on. And gradually these diagrams get a bit more complicated, right? So this is the most complicated one. I want to just kind of show you kind of how we try to balance some of this more approachable style with the sort of authentic research content. So this diagram shows you different approaches philosophically to science, essentially, scientific realism versus sort of anti-realism or relativism, various options in between, various differences between kind of the metaphysics of it and the kind of methods that are used. And at the bottom, you can see how specific research methods map onto those philosophical and ideological differences. We also did some redrawing of existing graphics from other people's work, where we thought it was quite good. So this one, for instance, is taken from an Open University course, which I think is discontinued. And it takes you on a bit of a journey. This in here, it's kind of like an unfolded map. So starting off with your question, trying to work out what are the ontological and epistemological dimensions here, and use that to try and get you to specific methods. So here's another one, similar idea, this time with some different paradigmatic approaches that are kind of quite common in educational research: positivism, constructivism, post-positivism, and critical theory approaches. So, so we tried to use these graphics to make a much more approachable take on this than you would normally find if you look in a methodology handbook. If you're particularly interested in the visual style, there is a paper. It's no longer forthcoming, actually. It's actually out. It's in the International Journal of Management and Applied Research, where myself and our artist reflect a bit on trying to communicate some of this stuff in an accessible, sort of cartoony style. Incidentally, all of the images that are used in the report are available on a CC BY license from the GoGN website, and you're free to use them in your own work. So let me just take you through the structure that we have briefly. So we go through these philosophical foundations. We talk about different research paradigms and what they mean and how they sort of differ from each other. And we go from there to talking about the paradigmatic methods associated with particular research paradigms. So as is positivism, interpretism, and so on. And we don't, try to answer every last question about these things. It is intended as a kind of an introductory text and a way into it. But we also sort of reflect a bit on openness as a feature of research, and what does an open research process look like? What do open practices in research look like? And we also give some guidance on sort of practicalities of running a research project, which you wouldn't often find in a methods handbook. So about half of the book is that, and the other half is these insights from our members. So these are the specific methods that people have used, and they provide their sort of critical commentary on it, so how it's been for them to use it. So we have action research, case studies, thematic analysis, design-based research, discourse analysis, ethnography, evaluation, experimental and quasi-experimental research, grounded theory, doing interviews and focus groups, doing systematic literature reviews, mixed methods research, narrative research, observation, phenomenography, phenomenology, social network analysis, and using surveys and questionnaires. That's quite a range of stuff, from very qualitative to very quantitative, lots of things in between, but by no means is it exhaustive, right? There's loads of other stuff you could include in an expanded version. And while I wouldn't say this is a research outcome, we couldn't sort of say this is what open research looks like. there are certain things we've come to associate with open practice around the agility of how people work and how they manage their project. Often there's a specific interest in influencing practice and providing evidence to support a policy change and that kind of thing. Working transparently, having a social media presence, leveraging networks as a way of doing research, using open data, publishing open access, and having this sort of very explicit interest in social justice. So that's not everyone does all those things, but these are what seem to be emerging in the surveys that we did. We conclude the report, the handbook, sorry, with some prompts which I think are relevant to anyone who's interested in doing research in this area. And it's really about thinking about like what's motivating what you're doing. Are you trying to describe something or identify a pattern? Is there a narrative that you're trying to challenge, or a new theory that you're trying to develop, something that you're drawing attention to that no one has before? But then the question is, well, what's openness doing in all this? Is it enhancing what you're doing? Can you add value to what you're doing through open practice, through things like creating data intended for reuse, sharing your tools, right? So if you develop a tool for a piece of research, if you share it, can that add value? And so on. So as I say, it's been pretty popular so far, quite pleasing to see that. You can download the handbook from the GoGN website. I put the link in here. It's CC BY. You can share it freely. You can do your own remix or whatever. Next year, we're intending to produce a companion volume, which will be based more on theories. So a bit less practical, a bit more kind of explaining how these theories map onto open education research. We're also considering doing an expanded second edition. So for instance, at the moment, there's no content around textbook impact research or COOP framework stuff, but it could easily be incorporated. And we've also got more researchers that didn't contribute to this version, but we could bring in. And there's a lot of potential here to create an even more useful tool going forward. And this in itself, I would take to be a sort of open practice. We also have another sort of companion publication where our members reviewed recent research papers, and that's also available from the website on an open license. Although the contributors are listed here, I won't go through all of them just for time's sake. But I would like to just briefly acknowledge the people who contributed to the methods handbook. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them right now because there's quite a few of them. But they're all people who are up and coming researchers or established researchers. And I think the handbook has been a very, very sort of useful experience for all of us in terms of putting everything together into one pot and trying to work out how does this all fit together? What does open research look like? And so many thanks to those people who contributed to this edition. I feel that I have to really just give you the sort of overview of the whole thing in 20 minutes, but there's so much richness and detail in the handbook, which I think anyone who's interested in doing research in open education would definitely find something there of value. So yeah, check it out. And if you're doing doctoral research in open education, or you know someone who is, send them our way. GoGN is free to join. We offer various forms of support. And thanks so much for your attention.
Thanks, Robert. So we are at time. So if anybody needs to leave, please feel free. But I thought there was one question in the chat. I thought we could at least tackle that one.
Yeah.
Are there certain disciplines that would benefit more from this handbook than others? I would like to recommend this to someone doing a master's in science.
Yeah, so the material that's, if you'd like, just about the working through the philosophical basis and the different research paradigms, that's universal, right? That applies to every researcher. And in a way that it has to, because it's the most general explanation for this stuff. It's only really the sort of second half of the handbook where we get into sort of open education stuff specifically. I'd also say there's nothing in the sort of first half of this handbook which is particularly radical or new, right? It's stuff that you can find in other research methods handbooks. We just try to make it a bit easier to get to grips with. So it would be quite feasible to start with our handbook and then move on to some of the references. And there are hundreds of references provided in the handbook. So people can go and quickly check out if you want to see some important work that, where people have written about research paradigms, you'll find it in there. And you can sort of use it as a starting point to guide your own research. But we've had something like 10 or 20 times as many downloads of this report, of this handbook, as there are members in our network. So, and we've seen lots of people sharing it on social media as well. So it's definitely got an audience way beyond just people who are interested in open education.
All right, well, I think I'm going to stop the recording.